perspective on law enforcement if you can't even go to a restaurant without some agitators locking the door and making you feel like your life is in danger. That is the environment that has been created, I think, by a lot of very, frankly, far-left people, but also by some of the state and local law enforcement officials who could do a much better job in cooperating and working. And by the way, I'm not talking about the cops, who these guys told me on the ground, the cops are very sympathetic to what they're dealing with. I'm talking about the state and local elected law enforcement officials who could do a lot better job in making their lives a little bit easier. And in the process, they would make the lives of all Minneapolis residents easier, and that's what we want. We want to be able to enforce the immigration laws on the one hand, while on the other hand, we want to make sure that people in Minneapolis are able to go about their day. And I want to say just one last point on this. So I heard from a business leader today who told me a very tough story, and I think so much of what's gone wrong in Minneapolis is people not trying to understand the perspective of somebody else. Try to understand what somebody else is experiencing, whether they're a law enforcement officer or anybody in the community here in Minneapolis. So they told me a story about this manufacturing facility where an illegal immigrant was being arrested. And as these employees are going into the manufacturing facility, all of a sudden an illegal immigrant shows up. They don't know it's an illegal immigrant. And then a bunch of ICE officers descend. Now, these people just want to go to work. They want to go to work safely. And now all of a sudden there's a major law enforcement operation happening right outside their place of business. Now, from one perspective, I certainly understand why a business leader or why an employee would say, whoa, what's going on? It's a little scary, no matter your position in life, if a bunch of cop cars show up and they're arresting somebody. Now, the additional context is that we know that people online have been encouraging illegal immigrants that one way they can evade arrest is by showing up at a legitimate place of business, making it impossible for these guys to actually enforce our immigration laws. So while I can understand the perspective of somebody who doesn't want to see an arrest happen at their place of work, I can also understand the perspective of our immigration enforcement officers who have to do their job and can't allow a heckler's veto over our immigration enforcement. And so much of what's gone wrong is the failure to do that. And here's the point. We can do a good job of enforcing our immigration laws without the chaos, but it actually requires the cooperation of state and local officials. If you look at blue cities and blue states, red cities and red states, you go to Austin, Texas, or Memphis, Tennessee, you go to the state of Texas, obviously a very red state, or the state of Tennessee, a very red state, but you've got blue cities within those states, you do not have this level of chaos. The reason why things have gotten so out of hand is because of failure of cooperation between the state and local authorities and what these guys are trying to do. We have a ton of resources, a ton of ICE agents in this city right now that I would rather us not have. I'd love to send those guys home. They're not even doing targeted immigration enforcement. They are trying to protect ICE officers who are doing immigration enforcement, because when a crowd surrounds them and these guys call 911, the local officials, the local cops have been told to stand down. So we have people here who aren't even doing immigration enforcement, they're doing force protection, so that if a rioter tries to ruin the life or assault an ICE officer, they're actually protected. Now, why doesn't it make more sense for the local cops to get involved in that situation? Why not just have the mayor or the local officials tell the police officers, you know what, if an ICE officer is being assaulted by a far-left agitator, you are invited, you should actually help them. That's what would work out in any normal situation, and that's what happens in nearly every jurisdiction, red or blue, in the United States of America. The reason it hasn't happened here is because the local authorities have been told, stand down, do not help ICE, promote the violence, promote the agitation, but don't do anything to lower the temperature and lower the chaos. That's a problem. Here's another example of how the lack of cooperation between state and local officials makes it harder for us to do our job and turns up the temperature. Let's say, for example, we have a criminal migrant who is a sex offender. And let's say that we've got to go and arrest that person who, Democrat or Republican, wants a sex offender living in their community. I would assume, I would hope that most people don't. But because they're an illegal alien, we don't know their last address. We may have known their address 3 years ago, but we don't know their address now. What we'd like to do is talk to local officials and say, you know what, according to the Medicaid rules, Where was the last address this person was domiciled? Or according to a SNAP application, a food stamps application, maybe that could give us insight to where this person is today. Or maybe they had some local court trouble. We could go to the local courthouse or even the local jail and try to find where this criminal sex offender is today. The local authorities have been told, do not cooperate. So these guys are trying to go out and enforce the law. They're trying to arrest sex offenders, but they're trying to do it in an environment where local officials have been told, do not help them, do not provide intelligence about where these sex offenders might be. This is disgraceful. And there are a lot of things that all of us could do better to lower the temperature, but the number one thing that I learned today is that the best way to facilitate reasonable enforcement of the law, but also to lower the chaos in Minneapolis, would be for state and local officials to cooperate. Now, I will say, on one final positive note, I actually think that there's some hope, some reason to think that there's going to be better cooperation in the weeks and months to come. I think that because I've talked to some of the local officials here. I think there are reasons to believe that these people are going to step up and actually ask the cops to protect our ICE officers when they're being assaulted, who are going to ask the local courts to cooperate with getting criminal sex offenders out of our community. That's a good thing. That's the good news, and that's something I'm going to work on when I get back to Washington. But please, if you're a local official, if you're the mayor of this town, if you have any influence over those people, just tell them to cooperate. Because we could have immigration enforcement operate as smoothly and without the chaos that we see in Austin, Texas, or Memphis, Tennessee, or even rural parts of the state of Minnesota. All we need is a little cooperation. I guarantee you we're going to do the best to be professional, to respect people's rights, to not do anything that we don't have to do in order to enforce immigration laws, but it would make our lives a lot easier, it would make our officers a lot safer, and it would make Minneapolis much less chaotic if we had a little bit of cooperation from the state and local officials. With that, I'll shut up and take some questions. Thank you, guys.
Vice President Vance, a local school district here is alleging ICE agents detained a 5-year-old after preschool on Tuesday. We've also seen multiple American citizens detained by ICE or harassed by ICE in the last 6 weeks. Are you proud of how your administration is conducting this immigration crackdown here in Minnesota right now?
Well, I'm proud of the fact that we're standing behind law enforcement, and I'm proud of the fact that we're enforcing the country's laws. But, you know, you asked a question about this 5-year-old kid. I actually saw this terrible story while I was coming to Minneapolis. We just left Toledo, Ohio this morning for an economic messaging event. And I see this story, and I'm a father of a 5-year-old, actually, a 5-year-old little boy. And I think to myself, oh, my God, this is terrible. How did we arrest a 5-year-old? Well, I do a little bit more follow-up research. And what I find is that the 5-year-old was not arrested, that his dad was an illegal alien. And then when they went to arrest his illegal alien father, the father ran. So the story is that ICE detained a 5-year-old. Well, what are they supposed to do? Are they supposed to let a 5-year-old child freeze to death? Are they not supposed to arrest an illegal alien in the United States of America? If the argument is that you can't arrest people who have violated our laws because they have children, then every single parent is going to be completely given immunity from ever being the subject of law enforcement. That doesn't make any sense. No one thinks that makes any sense. Now, you know, there are so many of these cases like that where if you just understand the context, there have been a number of situations that I've looked into personally where I say, wait a second. We don't want ICE arresting American citizens. They're supposed to be enforcing the immigration laws against illegal aliens. So then I look into it and I find out that the American citizen who was arrested took a swing at an ICE officer. You can't have that happen. And of course they have to defend themselves. And of course they have the right to detain somebody who assaults a law enforcement officer. Now, this is my point. Do we want these things to happen? Do we want these arrests to be so chaotic? No, we don't. These guys want it least of all. But if we had a little cooperation from local and from local and state officials, I think the chaos would go way down in this community.
President.
Go ahead.
After the Renee Good shooting, sir, the administration seemed to suggest...
Yeah, well, you can go next.
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, that's fine. I'll take both.
After the Renee Good shooting, sir, the administration seemed to... After the Renee Good shooting, the administration seemed to suggest that ICE officers enjoyed near complete immunity. But today you told the Washington Examiner that when appropriate, the administration might take disciplinary actions against ICE agents. So is that a change in opinion? And if so, why the change in tone?
No, I didn't say, and I don't think any other official within the Trump administration said that officers who engaged in wrongdoing would enjoy immunity. That's absurd. What I did say is that when federal law enforcement officers violate the law, that is typically something that federal officials would look into. We don't want these guys to have kangaroo courts. We want them to actually have real due process, real investigation, because again, sometimes they're accused of wrongdoing, and it turns out when you learn the context, they didn't actually do anything wrong. But of course, we're going to investigate these things. Of course, we're investigating the Renee Good shooting, but we're investigating them in a way that respects people's rights and that ensures that if somebody did something wrong, yes, they're going to face disciplinary action, but we're not going to judge them in the court of public opinion. I've spoken at length on this particular case. I think that Renee Good's death is a tragedy. I also think that she rammed an ICE officer with her car. So the tragedy here is multi-layered. The tragedy is there was a misunderstanding. The tragedy is that Renee Good lost her life. The tragedy is that you have ICE officers who are going into communities where they're worried that if they call 911, no one's going to come to help them. That is what produces this terrible situation, and it's something state and local officials here in Minnesota could solve.
Mr. Vice
Yes, sir.
Could you give us a message towards March for Life tomorrow, especially regarding the cooperation and family values? It's a shame the kids have to get caught up in all this, and towards that, sir.
Well, it is a shame that kids have to get caught up in this. I am speaking at March for Life tomorrow. I'm pro-life, and I'm very excited to speak there. I want to talk about local law enforcement, but I am. As a child, I saw people in my family get arrested. It's terrible. It's heartbreaking, it's chaotic, it's traumatic for the kids. I can recognize that, and I can recognize that we got to support these kids, while on the other hand saying that just because you're a parent doesn't mean that you get complete immunity from law enforcement. And I think we have to hold both of those thoughts in our head at the same time. We've got to be sympathetic to the kids who are caught up in some of these enforcement actions. We've also got to say we have to enforce the law without bias, with fairness, but we've got to enforce the law.
Mr. Vice President.
There was a class in St. Cloud a few weeks ago, and their mayor said they haven't heard about this thing in the city, and how does ICE kind of proactively work with these local agencies in order to really possibly make sure it's not to do that?
You said there was an altercation in St. Cloud. Yeah.
After the incident, the mayor said that ICE did not communicate with them if they were in the city for a major operation, but police chief did not know about the operation at the time. Could you talk a little bit about proactive communication?
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of the takeaways. I've talked with these guys before we came on the stage, but during our roundtable and some of the other conversations we've had. Communication, we absolutely want to ensure there's good communication between federal officials and state and local officials, and I'm sure that we can do better on that. We absolutely want to make sure that we are communicating, but that also requires a two-way street, and that's the point that I make about state and local officials. These guys will absolutely communicate with state and local officials. They'll tell people if they have to do an enforcement operation in a particular municipality, but part of that is they also want to ensure that if they're communicating about their whereabouts, that's not being used as a weapon against them. Sometimes they tell people where they're going, and then they find out that their agents' faces are on on Reddit or on some social media thread saying, here's this guy, we know he's going to be at this place at this exact time. So that communication has got to be a two-way street. These guys are going to communicate with business leaders, with local officials, with state officials, but we also need the local officials and state officials to do a good job of protecting people when they're in their communities. We're not asking, by the way, we don't want any police officer in this community, in this state, to help us do immigration enforcement. We've got that. But if a protester shows up and that protester turns violent against our immigration officers, we really, really need the cooperation of our local partners. We haven't gotten it yet, but I think if we do, we really can lower the temperature. Yeah. Yeah, so I saw that story, and the story is like so much that I read in the mainstream media. It's missing a whole lot of context.